I'll do a quick introduction and then turn it over to General Lyons. So General Stephen Lyons is the Port and Supply Chain Envoy for the Department of Transportation. He took command August 24th, 2018, becoming the 13th commander of U.S. Transportation Command, which is U.S. Transcom, one of 11 combatant commands in the Department of Defense. U.S. Transcom's mission is to protect and sustain military power globally, project and sustain military power globally in order to assure our friends and allies, deter potential adversaries, and if necessary, respond to win decisively. His experience spans 36 years of military service in positions of progressive leadership responsibility. General Lyons, thanks again for joining our committee, and we look forward to an update from your perch at the DOT.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, Jeff, good to see you again. Thanks a lot. And good to see all your members and participants. And really thanks to you and the entire group here for the work that you've been doing for quite some time now. But I do appreciate, and I've always kept up with your recommendations and insights, and I think they've always been right on the mark and very balanced in terms of an approach on how to go forward. So what I'll do is I'll just take a couple minutes. Hopefully, I know there's a lot of time allocated here, but save a few minutes for some questions if folks have them. So I think the last time we talked was probably October timeframe. We were in a little bit different situation. Relative to October, we're in a much better place in terms of the good movements chain. When you look at shipping times, when you look at freight costs, when you look at basic confidence, reliability, and systems, that has improved, dramatically relative to where we were a year ago. And I see Gene on the screen, and he's in a much better place out there as well. And he's been a great leader in this effort. And so the question I think begs is, why are we in a better place, right? What issues have we really addressed here? And what's really a function of what we all see as softer demand. And let's be honest, right? A large degree of the improvements that we've seen in the goods movement chain has really been a function of softer demand. And this should not be a surprise to anybody, because when you look at the underlying cause of all that congestion, you really do have to go back really to the demand shock, in late 2020 timeframe. And any time, like we discussed last time, you see this enormous shock against a fairly lean supply chain capacity, you're going to generate congestion. I think the frustrating part is it took so long to uncover from the congestion. And then really kind of an understanding of not just the congestion, that kind of is what it was, but what were the second and third order implications for the consumer? And when you can get past some of the finger pointing and the enormous costs to consumers, to retailers and manufacturers, and some enormous profits made by some, I mean, you really start to understand some of the underlying issues of the congestion that was caused by a shock in demand, but then the second and third order implications on inflation and other impacts on the economy, which is why the administration, has applied so much effort in this area. So we shouldn't be completely surprised that the rebalance of supply and demand has resulted in what I might describe as kind of, although some still might argue with me, kind of a pre-pandemic resetting of at least the goods movement chain. So, then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what did all that reveal? I mean, I think we were surprised in many areas on what we didn't know about supply chains globally in the United States of America, and particularly in C-suites, quite frankly. And so it did reveal some inefficiencies, some friction, particularly in this private sector system of systems, if you would. I think it also revealed some vulnerabilities in procurement and sourcing when you think about the broader supply chain and potential implications there, both at a national level, national security level, many of things which you guys discussed, as well as a private sector level, where I think companies have taken a relook at how they source and reassess the resiliency and the cost benefits risk association. And then I think the question becomes, well, what are we going to do to prevent the future shock, right? So we don't want to end up in a situation where we were a year and a half ago, 10 years down the road. And what I would say is that's an interesting question, right? And I'm asking all the stakeholders the same question to get their input on what issues we really need to address that are kind of what I'll call fundamental underlying root cause kinds of issues. I think we ought to be honest with ourselves. So I have not found a company yet that's willing to invest in a level of resiliency in a supply chain that is very costly, by the way, that's going to anticipate a pandemic that's maybe 30 to 50 years from now. That's unrealistic to think that the private sector equities are going to make those kind of investments. In fact, you've already seen now excess capacities in some of these areas with regard to goods movement. Having said that, though, there are many things that I think we can do to help, to facilitate, to continue to collaborate, particularly on the information space and levels of transparency, which are greatly lacking in the goods movement side of the house. But I also think the companies that I've seen really taking away the right lessons are really looking at their procurement functions, which used to be maybe a transactional approach, to something that's more meaningful to assess resiliency and risk on potential implications for how it could affect their outcomes as a business. And then the final thing I would just say to this group, and I think, again, my assessment is you guys have been very measured about your approach here, which I've really appreciated in terms of, just recommending, right? Not outrageous recommendations, but increasing stakeholder collaboration, assessing procurement, vendor sourcing kinds of things, infrastructure investments, but not, and this is my caution, I think it aligns to what I've seen in your recommendations, avoid what I would call is either regulating or legislative action that might be rearward focused on a congestion problem that was a year ago that could have, if we're not careful, we don't understand the root cause analysis, implications down the road that might not be helpful for private sector and American prosperity. So with all that aside, yes, we're in a much better place thanks to a lot of great folks, many on the screen here, guys like Gene Soroka, I think Barbara might be on from South Carolina, and others, right, that worked incredibly hard through record volumes of freight to get this thing back in balance. We are in a better place, but it took a ton of hard work by some hardworking Americans to get us there. And now I think we need to continue to reevaluate again, not just how we got here, but what do we really want to take away, and what should we do, and what of those areas, right? Because it's such a private sector enterprise should involve federal either collaboration, regulation, legislation. There are some legislative drafts working that may need to be tempered a little bit, to be honest with you, until we figure out what to do, what the results of OSRA 1 are going to be. So with all that said, I'll pause. Jeff, I'll take any questions, be happy to in the time that we have allotted. And again, I always appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to you and the team for what you're doing for Secretary Raimondo.
Thanks, General Lyons. Thank you for your leadership. We'll open it up to the floor. Anybody have a question they'd like to ask General Lyons?
Gene, fire away.
General, great to see you as always, and thanks for what you've done for our industry and so many others. I'm going to show you one slide, and I know this has been a hot topic everywhere. This is what the initial distribution of investment on the IIJA looks like. 2 construction projects for the West Coast, everything to the Eastern Gulf. Said this to the Secretary earlier, sir. We don't want to take a nickel out of the pockets of our friends in those ports and all the great work they do for this country, but we've got to have a more even distribution of this funding. So we'll lean on you. Unfortunately, Mayor Landrieu didn't have time for much today because we ran over. Secretary's aware, Secretary Buttigieg is aware. Need your advice and guidance. What do we need to do better, faster, more of in order to have the funds coming our way. Competitive bids, isolated state opportunities, et cetera. We've got to do a lot more. You may remember that from years 2010 to 2020, the West Coast was out invested 11-1 by the federal government. We cannot have this repeat itself.
Yeah, Gene, two quick comments. One, this was an issue that John Bakari, before I even came on board, flagged, right, for West Coast versus other areas in terms of money. And frankly, a lot of that went back to really the state picking up a leadership role in advocating for federal funds for the West Coast. Now, when it has to do with harbor maintenance tax, which is, I think, what you were alluding to here, more
no,
so
sir, not harbor maintenance tax.
Okay.
Completely separate issue. Some of the modernization and reform that area is good because it's not taking away money from those are recipient ports, but it is putting more in the coffers of the donor ports. This is specifically the IIJA.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Gene. No, I don't disagree with you.
Thanks, General.
Ian?
Hey, General, nice to see you again. Just more a couple comments and a question. One, I want to thank you for your approach and how you've addressed not only the supply chain issue, but other issues that you and I worked on together over the past year. Very much a solutions-oriented approach, pragmatic approach. And I wanted to zero in on your comments about policymaking in the midst of a crisis, or policymaking in the midst of a temporary challenge that could have longer term, broader impacts that end up undermining, overarching networks. And that's something I think that needs to stay front of mind for all of us collectively as we think through these types of issues that are extremely complex. It's easy to get caught in near-term remedies that might address a particular micro challenge you're seeing that could end up having broader, longer-term negative impacts to the overarching health of our integrated networks. And so, again, more just a general comment that I appreciate your recognizing that and your approach on that, because it's easy to get caught up in what's happening at the moment and losing track of the longer-term, more structural issues.
Yeah, Ian, I agree with you, and we're, in several spaces, I think we got pretty good alignment on that train of thought. FMC and others. Some of it's just kind of a transparency, education, perhaps with some lingering issues or initiatives up on the Hill that I think just need balance, right? Good intentions. I think everybody wants the same outcomes in terms of fluidity and transparency across the supply chain. But we do need to be cognizant of second and third implications down road in essentially a free market enterprise. So I agree with that. And if, I'm alluding to some degree to the effort to perhaps relook vessel sharing agreements, alliances, these kinds of things. What we want to be mindful of is that we don't end up a couple of years from now under pressure, and we've got a whole lot less ocean carriers. We want the big 9 or 10 or 12, depending on how you count them, but the big 9 to maintain, to be competitive out there for the market.
Willie?
First of all, thank you, General, for all you've done, and thanks for joining us today. I just want to pick up on one of your comments about transactional nature. A couple months ago, I interviewed Toyota in particular, right, trying to understand why it was that they fared so much better in the semiconductor parts shortage, right? They really did much better. And the concept, which I just wanted to plant, was that they redefined the notion of lead time to involve supply chain risk as part of that, okay? And so while everybody said, oh, Toyota gave up on lean production, it's like, no, we didn't do that at all. What we did is we brought that kind of disruption risk into our calculations, right? They looked and they said, our chips come from the Pacific Rim, which is subject to, geopolitical as well as natural disruptions, and therefore they adjusted their lead time. So just an idea there.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. People ask if lean is a thing of the past, and I think everybody here knows that's not the case at all. it does force us to reassess risk in terms of when there's increased uncertainty, periods of particularly, reliability issues we had. And you have to compensate for that environment, but there will be certainly, a pressure to bring costs down to maximize profits, and logistics as an enabler, will become a profit, a cost center that optimizes profit. But just to your point, with a different view on risk, I would say, and I think that's been the eye-opening.
Yeah, and I think just to elaborate that on a little bit is like it was a trade-off between cost versus lost sales, right? Which allowed them to rebalance that equation, right? Which was it was just a thoughtful way of incorporating that disruption risk into their lean production system.
Willie, if I could, did you see the Georgetown report? I don't know, a few weeks ago, relative to freight pricing and the implications on inflation. Now, as they did their analysis, they correlated the increase in a container box to about 0.7% increase in pricing, and frankly, on the back of the envelope, I'm pretty close to where they landed without the same analysis they put into it. But to your point though, if you include the other implications, the second and third implications for the congestion, increased inventory, shifts to premium freight, loss of confidence, missed market opportunities on imports and exports, by the way, I think the implications are far greater than 10%. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what happens is people are looking at one cost element as opposed to taking the bigger picture, right? And it's just like one of the things I found in the supply chains, one of the big issues and surprises that I found is people look one step up and one step down in the chain, and they don't look at the whole thing and what are the cost implications. But I think you're spot on that incremental cost of delay and congestion, and what did that do to my product cost versus the cost of carrying inventory. Although the inventory thing is going to that has a different way I see playing out as well, because we're seeing the impacts of that liquidation now.
Yeah, plenty of room for work in that space. Yeah, thanks.
Well, you brought up a great point, which is when we draw the boundary of what we look at for our financial statements and then for the whole supply chain, and if there are giant differences in the kind of economic incentives, maybe arbitrage between those, there's probably risk that's not properly being characterized in the financials.
Well, a lot of those risks are unpriced, and therefore what historically we've done is we've ignored them, right? Now, that's turning out not to have been so smart, okay, but I would argue they're still unpriced.
Yes. Anyone else have a question for General Lyons? We're almost to the end of the allotted time.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Always good to see you and the team. And Chad, if you need something, I'm always a phone call away.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us again and again for your leadership in this critical work. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
So next, I'd like to introduce Carl Bensel. Carl's joined us in the past. Let's see, do we have Carl?
He's coming on right now. He's
all right. Well, I'll introduce him, John. Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Carl Bensel was confirmed to the Federal Maritime Commission on November 21st, 2019, sworn into office on December 9th. Prior to his appointment at the FMC, Commissioner Bensel created and established a consulting services company where he represented clients on regulatory and legislative issues within the areas of transportation, energy, and other areas of federal regulatory oversight. From 2004 to 2014, Commissioner Bensel served as vice president and head of the Federal Advocacy Division of a full-scale public relations firm, the DCI Group. Prior to working in the private sector, Mr. Bensel served the public sector for 10 years as a Senate Professional Committee staffer, including most recently as Senior Democratic Counsel of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. He moved to his role in the Senate after spending 4 years on the House Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, where he served as counsel for maritime policy. Commissioner Bensel, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to an update on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act.
Nice to meet you, Jeff. It's good to see so many other friends out on the screen. Gene, I can see you. So looking forward to connecting in California coming up. So, but happy to meet with the Commerce Department's Advisory Committee on Supply Chain. And I actually was intending Richard Bowl had scheduled something earlier and I missed it. And so I apologize for that, but it's actually better because I have more information for you. And so, so I can brief you with breaking news that we're finalizing information related to the MTDI effort and recommendations that I'm going to be making for further public consideration. So John, I think, why don't you turn it to hopefully the PowerPoint that we have. And for those of you, John Young is John, you there?
I am. I'm trying to share the screen.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, probably John Young is my counsel and in charge of these sort of things. Okay, we got it. And just flip to the first screen. We commenced the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative. I know we've talked with your committee in the past about this as a result of the request by Chairman Maffei, consistent with efforts that we've been taking to evaluate the supply chain during the pandemic through Task Force 29 and through a program of auditing ocean carriers and issues related to detention and demurrage. And then the chairman asked me to lead an effort to evaluate the system of information applicable to the marine supply chain, consistent with our authority to require the implementation of just and reasonable regulations and practices related to or connected with receiving, handling, storing, or delivering property. And that is intermodal coverage. Since the 1984 Shipping Act, we've had jurisdiction to consider intermodal practices related to a ocean through bill of lading from a point in a foreign destination to an interior point delivery in the United States. So it does cover intermodal services. And we looked at the information system that was in place with an eye towards creating recommendations on data structures and standards moving forward, and the development of a dictionary, a data lexicon to describe the standards that we would recommend. So, John, with that, you can go to the next slide. We've had, I think some of your members are, I don't know if Mike's still here, but we had 80 meetings with 80 presenters. They're all available on YouTube. I wanted to have them public, wanted to cover the entire supply chain. So we covered, ocean carriers, terminals. We covered labor, intermodal railroads, integrators, pretty much the soup to nuts through the entire supply chain. We work closely with our federal partners, Commerce Department, CBP, DOT, Coast Guard, USDA, State Department, and continue to have dialogue with respect to potential requirements for maritime data going forward. And we culminated, I guess, the 18 meetings in June with a summit that allowed our staff to put together a report for me to review, which included the comments, the perspective of all of the participants in the activities of the MTDI. and I used that to formulate a preliminary draft set of recommendations, which has been circulating. And so go ahead, John, to the next one. Essentially, we're trying to create a standard for what I'm calling now maritime transportation data system that would harness existing data sources to create actionable awareness, a real-time awareness of ocean shipping from the point of inception, or even prior to that, frankly, to a culmination of delivery at an intermodal terminal in the interior points of the United States. And so I think you can flip to the next one, John. But I think it's critical that the MTDI participants all recognize a need to have real-time information about ocean shipping, and we don't have that now. We have, if you go through, and I've spent a lot of time on websites between ports and terminals and ocean carriers, we really have static information. So we can see where a particular vessel is, but we don't know when it's going to arrive. We don't know what their planning requirements are. Commonly, ocean carriers will provide reference to a document that allocates information based on the strings of services that they provide throughout the international journey and service arrangement. But it's really only a catalog of how much time it takes to arrive in place to place. And some carriers have taken steps to provide more real-time in-transit visibility, but it's not harmonized. And so we're looking at requirements that would require ocean carriers to provide real-time in-transit visibility, starting from the perspective of planning 3 months in advance of any voyage. So information would be required in real time, available through an API that would provide information for each U.S. berth that they would service, their projected services. And so this would be anything that they're planning to do 3 months out of the initial commencement of a voyage, and provide real-time assessments of any changes to that policy. So if they cancel the voyage, if there was a delay in the voyage, there would be requirements for this information to be provided. So in this way, we would have in-transit visibility requirements 3 months out from the commencement of a voyage. So approximately 4 to 5 months from actual arrival at port berth, we would have information related to potential services. And I think it's critical. In terms of transit, we need to do a better job. Right now, you can get a dot in the Pacific that doesn't move very fast, and we simply have to do better on that. And so what we're recommending is there will be real-time information as to position and status all the way through the movement of the system, reasons for delay, subsequent voyages all the way through the supply chain, and real time. And I think probably most important is real time estimated forecasted arrivals. We don't have that right now. In most instances, this information is provided by email by ocean carriers if they want to provide that information. So you can actually go to a port complex website, and they will have a request to be provided additional information on ETAs. So the requirement would be for the ocean carrier, when they made a decision that operationally changed their potential arrival, that they would provide notice of that, and that would be something that would also be provided to terminals 5 days in advance of arrival at a berth in the United States, and it would serve as an earliest receiving date for export cargo. So the ocean carrier's requirements would be to provide real-time in-transit visibility status related to its services, including projection of when they would arrive. What we're looking at is all of the responsibilities for information would be provided by the party that is in possession of the cargo. So we have what are called best source requirements. So information will be provided by the party that would be in possession of the cargo, or to the extent that a third person party that is not in possession of the cargo wanted to provide the information, they would be required to use information from the third party that is in possession of the cargo. We had a lot of misinformation being disseminated because it wasn't residing with those that were there. And information is classified in two different categories. Open facing is public facing information that the public should be entitled to receive information on, publicly available through an API, maintained for a 3-month period for public inspection, and stored for up to a 2-year period or 1-year period, depending on the category of information. And closed facing information, that is basically information that is proprietary to a cargo interest that has a contract that's protected as it is now with access encrypted technology to only allow those that are entitled to legally have this information to get the information. And so when the carrier arrived at the terminal, there would be a transfer of a responsibility in terms of the information that would be provided, and that the carrier's responsibilities at that point were to rely on information from either the terminal or the intermodal rail service. So, John, you can switch to the next. Marine terminal operators, I mean, they're the interface that's critically important in movement through the system. And marine terminal operators have both open-facing and closed-facing requirements for cargo. Real-time information related to unloading and loading. So they would post information on services coming into their terminal and when they commenced loading and unloading operations. Information related to the earliest receiving date would be required to be made publicly available so that exporters could bring in cargo on a date certain. And harmonized information related to access into and out of the terminal. This would be information related to your appointment system, to any restrictions. So for instance, if the terminal was determining that they couldn't take empty containers, or they were restricting movements to dual use, or they had free time for any sorts of movement into or out of the terminal, or we're using, for instance, site storage. This would all be open-facing information that would be required to be posted 12 p.m. the day in advance of the next day of business. And these are all requirements that in some cases are being provided, but are not uniformly being applied, and they're not being applied on a timely basis. So some of this information is not being transmitted to people in a way that's effective and allows efficiency. So anyways, the requirements for open-facing information are largely related to access into and out of the terminal, and closed-facing information is related to the cargo within the terminal and its status for pickup or delivery. And the requirements that the MTDS would now propose is to establish categories of service in the or status essentially in the terminal itself. So notice of availability would be determined as the carrier had released the cargo, so they had made a determination that there were no legal responsibilities left that would restrict the ability of a shipper to pick up their cargo, and the marine terminal operator had made a determination that the cargo could be physically moved to the next point in its journey, so it was capable at that point of being transferred to a chassis. So those two steps would have to occur in order to classify cargo as being available. Unavailable is any other status that would prohibit it from being available. All of this information would result in cargo being classified in one of four categories at any time. This would be time and date stamped and made available to the shipper or the agent of the shipper or the ocean carrier, whoever was entitled to close-facing information. The other two categories are notice of a government hold. In that case, there would be notice on the tender of information, time and date stamped, that a government inspection agency wanted to review the cargo contents. That would be required to be time and date stamped, and any movement in or out of the terminal would be reported as gate in and gate out, and the location of the terminal of the cargo, so as to keep custody information related to the cargo. And then also cargo handling is the fourth category, and that would be treated separate, the identical to marine terminal operations for a government hold. So essentially, cargo is going to be in one of those four categories of service at any one time. We are also requiring time and date stamped information on free time for each piece of cargo, when demurrage would go into effect, and any expanded demurrage requirements, and outgating of cargo information on each piece of cargo. So essentially, we want to harmonize the status of cargo while in the terminal, provide clear rules on where it is with respect to pickup and availability, and access information going forward from all of the terminals. In terms of coordination of all of the practices that are surrounding the port, and there are a lot of issues related to some of the intermodal services provided that are integral to the movement of cargo, chassis and drayage, trucking, and so it really kicked this issue around, and we are going to be proposing some open-facing requirements for port operations for the general port, but each port was really different. And I look at Gene's port in LA. He's got a bunch of tenants there, and he's got to work with them on the MTOs. And you've got a port like Charleston, South Carolina State's ports authorities, where they run their own operations. So the information requirements and the levels of control are different at all of these ports. So we're looking at establishing two requirements, one voluntary guidelines, and these are issues related to how the ports might consider a process of providing coordination to the multiples of parties that access the port, and open-facing information about services provided through the port, and that is information related to carrier operations, MTOs, and intermodal railroad services. For the most part, most ports actually provide this information right now on their websites, and it would be required to be linked in. Some of the ports may decide that they want to do more with that information, and I urge them to do that. And then in terms of general information, we're asking for information related to berthing and pilotage to be made available publicly. We had the carriers wanted to make sure that they could get information that would be related to the forecast that they would have to do related to real-time in-transit visibility, and anything related to special conditions impacting the port in general, terminal closures, weather issues, issues related to any particular special operating conditions, such as the establishment of off-site storage or anything like that. And in terms of the voluntary guidelines, these are issues that the FMC would undertake with voluntary guidelines and basically best practices on potential coordination issues related to drayage, driving, IEPs, warehouses and distribution centers, coordination of intermodal services, many of the things that they're already doing now, but we'll allow those to move forward consistent with each port. If you're the Port of Boston, you don't need what the Port of LA needs or the Pacific Northwest ports. So we're proposing that there be flexibility in the implementation of these standards. And John, go to the railroads. Really, if we don't address the issues of railroad services from these major port complexes, it's irrelevant because we'll run into the same congestion problems and issues. So we're proposing that these requirements would be made applicable to any port that handles over 250,000 TEUs annually, and intermodal railroad services under through bill of lading to any inland terminals that handle over 250,000 TEUs. And so the intermodal rail services would have similar obligations to provide information related to their own terminals that service those ports, providing information on arrival of trains coming in and departures leaving their terminals. The rail carriers would be required to provide close-facing information. They're subcontractors, so someone that has privity of contract would be able to get information related to the movement of that cargo, and rail facility operations at their terminals would have similar requirements as it pertains to access to and from their own rail ramps and terminals, and status requirements for cargoes that cargo in their terminals that would be consistent with those that would be suggested for implementation in terminals. So those are what we're going to suggest. I am in the process of finalizing a report, a statement of views that will be circulating. There will be the actual standards and how they would be implemented. A recommendation on those. There'll be the flow chart that you saw and a lexicon. And I would point that the lexicon, the definitions included in the lexicon would make changes to the definition of demurrage and detention. Demurrage would be an assessment allocated in excess of free time established for storage at a terminal. And if to the extent that a third party assessed demurrage, it would have to be consistent with the assessment of the party that owned the storage. And the same would be true with detention. So we had a lot of instances where we have multiple parties billing demurrage. Demurrage is an incentive for the movement of cargo through the terminal. And so we're obviating the ability to use it as an incentive by providing multiple parties, some that do not control that space or the equipment, to assess the penalty. So that's what the recommendations are. I anticipate that we're going to have further public discussion. I'm talking to the chairman about some opportunity to do some public discourse, whether it's a hearing or meetings or stakeholder meetings. But if it's well received, or even if it's received, I will be making a motion to proceed to a rulemaking to implement this as a federal standard. We have voluntary standards right now in place, and we have to take the next step in this instance. And I think the recommendations are not establishing new requirements or information, but trying to harmonize the information that's out there to use it more effectively and allow the system to be more efficient based on the ability to get better information. So with that, I'm going to turn it to I know this crowd is pretty talkative and willing to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it back over. And I think I have a couple. Well, I've already exceeded my time. So I'll leave it to you, Jeff, what you want to do.
Well, we can shorten the closing. Let's see if there are questions. One that I had, Commissioner Bensel, is who's going to host the data store and APIs that would be exposed if this is approved?
So it would be each segment of the industry would be required to provide their own information, and the ports would be established. Each port that had carriers, terminals, and railroads servicing them also would be a repository of that information. So they could either choose to take the information and just create a hyperlink to their services, which is pretty much what they have now, or they could take further steps to handle that data that would be provided. And so that would be left to the discretion of the individual ports, but it would be the ports that would function as the repository, and there would be mandatory carriage requirements for each of the participants in the supply chain.
So the data would be the data stores would be created by each port.
It would be created by each participant of the services provided to the port, and the port would, at minimum, have to provide access to that data, but they could coordinate that data themselves.
So will you specify security standards, reliability standards, access speed, and so on as part of the recommendation?
Yes, there will be specific requirements on when notification has to be made, what sort of notification would have to be made. But essentially, it's a real-time in-transit visibility requirement, so it subsumes everything. You know, if you are moving into Singapore as part of a voyage from Yokohama to LA, you would have to provide information that you were at berth in Singapore, that you had a real-time estimated arrival time in LA, that you were delayed because of certain reasons. There was a delay reasons code. And that information would have to be posted as soon as the carrier operationally made the determination to change when they would arrive. So they would have a real-time running forecast of what their arrivals would be at U.S. ports.
Let me just do one more follow-up. So, but there would not be a central data store.
No. So, you know, I looked at that. You know, it's not that it's sort of like if I go into the Pittsburgh airport to get service from Pittsburgh, I really don't care about what's happening in Chicago. And so I knew that at the very least there needed to be a repository of information that could be used. But we determined, you know, at this point, we are not looking at you know, end-to-end cargo movement tracking, smart containers, but we're setting the frameworks between service, between major ports and intermodal points interior. And so it was probably important only to have a system that would be responsive to the needs of shippers through those complexes.
Thanks, Commissioner Bensel. Other questions?
No one else?
That's a sign of a thorough presentation. Cindy.
Yes, just quickly, and as far as timelines I mean, I guess you're working from a point of approval forward. Any sense, or is there a, you know, kind of addendum data that talks about the rollout timeframe?
So we would, and so the requirements that I would like to propose as standards for information, implementation of a track and trace methodology. I'd like to have some more, you know, feedback you know, I talked to the Chamber of Commerce and they said, listen, we don't usually support any type of federal regulation. We may, in this instance, support that. And I'm talking to the longshoremen to make sure that, you know, this is not going to create all sorts of issues. So I have a general sort of sense that things we're in a pretty good position in terms of all the parties that I've been talking to. But in order to get a federal standard, we'd have to have a vote on going to a rulemaking process, and that rulemaking process would ensue with comment and suggestions for alterations and that. So realistically, you're looking the balance of this year in a regulatory process and potential implementation next year. I've had discussions with DOT, you know, about funding some of this stuff and ensuring that we get some resources in. So I think you're looking maybe a year and a half until we're getting into the process of finalizing how to do this. So you know, I've talked to I've talked to the ocean carriers. I've sent a letter to them. I'm going to go over to Europe and meet with them there. And we're talking about, they want to set up a common API system for in-transit visibility. And so I wrote a letter to the Digital Container Shipping Association on that. I've talked closely to the companies that provide terminal operating systems and purchase that to make sure this is viable. So I feel that with minor modifications and changes, all of this is achievable technologically. It's probably going to take some time to go through the process here in Washington, D.C. So I wouldn't say that anything could be done until a year and a half from now.
Ian?
Hey, Carl, good to see you, and thanks for the presentation. Look forward to more discussions. You kind of talked about the broader timeline if you end up going through the regulatory process, and you may have mentioned specifically presentation to the other members and when you might decide to take a vote on whether or not you're jump off that diving board into the regulatory process. But can you just, for those of us who didn't catch it, what's the timeline on getting in front of the rest of your committee members in a formal capacity?
So we don't really have it. So Ian, I'm going to finalize the information. We're going to meet with you, AAR, and go through that. But I think I've talked to the chairman. We'd like to even do some public stuff on this to solicit additional comments before we get to that. So I don't think, you know, I have a firm a timeline, but I'm saying 2 or 3 months of consideration. So I'd like to, by into the summer, be able to know whether we're going to take that next step of jumping into the regulatory process. So there could be further modifications during that time frame, but I would say 3 months, 4 months, shooting to get something proceeding during the summer time frame.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, and so we've been I want to thank you and John Gray and your folks, and we've had really good we've actually had great participation from every segment of the industry. And so we're listening. We're in listening mode, and we'll continue to be in listening mode on that.
Great. Appreciate it. Take care.
So we need to wrap up. Commissioner Betzel, thank you so much for joining us. A terrific update, and look forward to more details on the implementation plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, Jeff. Thanks.
All right.
Nice seeing everyone.
So let's move to an update from Revathi about any issues from the Manufacturing Competitive Subcommittee, but also a particular focus on high-skilled worker visas. Revathi?
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, just overall, I'd say that the kind of Manufacturing Subcommittee did a lot of work on recommending ideas around the workforce in particular, because one of the biggest challenges we have is hiring people. So we like the focus on growth, the focus on creating manufacturing growth in the US, but we feel one of the biggest challenges is being able to hire the right set of people to enable that growth. So one among the many recommendations, one of the specific ones we looked at was, how do you make sure you can bring in advanced technology, advanced manufacturing, immigration workers into the country to support this type of growth? And this came in pretty comprehensively from many of the CEOs who are in the subcommittee, that this was one of their key challenges in terms of hiring people. So what we did was collect the data from many organizations on what were their challenges, what types of jobs were open. And we particularly looked at visa allocations for highly educated kind of immigrant students in the field of kind of advanced manufacturing, advanced technology. So just focusing a little bit on the data, what we looked for is kind of the current number of open positions and what % of them would qualify from like an H-1B visa to secure that type of a qualified talent. So and then we also looked at the history of the last 2 or 3 years to see how these visas were allocated by the US government. So we got information from a number of companies that included organizations like Cisco, Micron, TSMC, so a wide variety of organizations. Just a high level overview of numbers itself. I'd say around 32% of these required, of the open position required visas to find qualified talent. And then if you took out some of the organizations that were using outsourced manufacturing as their business model, that jumped to a high 42%. So it's a fairly significant number. And if you looked at the history of H-1Bs granted, right, in 2020 was around 45%, 2021, 35%, 2022, 26%. So the whole idea was if we could prioritize advanced manufacturing, advanced technology position within the kind of existing lottery system to achieve whatever are the policy goals, then it would be a good way to really funnel kind of the existing H-1B visas into this particular category, and particularly with a focus around CHIPS Act, Build Back Better, IRA, where we're seeing a lot of improvements in terms of building the manufacturing supply chain in the US, which is an exciting place to be. It would also help to really have the support to build the workforce required to enable that type of growth. So that was kind of the overall work that we were done. And, you know, I think the view was like, if the US couldn't fill these types of positions, then the other countries may use these talented individuals, which would not make sense from a US perspective. But in terms of next steps, what we need to do is continue to gather more industry data, make sure that we can provide this information so that it can be used in a meaningful way, and identify all the kind of US government mechanisms that we can find to make sure we can encourage this type of talent to be contributed to the overall US workforce. So that was kind of the summary of one of the many workforce recommendations we had. And we feel like this is probably could be a more achievable one, because it really focuses on what's already being done and identifying it and moving it in the direction of the industry that we want to kind of grow and support. So I think that was the main focus of work on this particular group. So I'll pause there and see if there is any questions, or Jeff, we can also talk about, if you want to go to like the FDA conversation or any part of it, you know, there are other folks here who are on the call who can talk to that also.
Before we get to that, I just want to make sure that the conclusion that I heard was that we would like to see more highly educated, you know, highly skilled visas, H-1B visas granted for these open positions, the 42% just in manufacturing alone that could be filled by folks where we don't have that talent internally. Because if we don't fill these jobs in the United States with immigrants, we're going to end up offshoring that work to the places where those immigrants are permitted to work, which really makes no sense for our country.
Jeff, my apologies, but may I interject here? We actually skipped Ronnie Chatterjee, and he has a hard stop.
Okay. We did. Yes, we did. You're right. Thank you. That's my mouse mistake. All right. So let's pause for a second. Ronnie, would you? Thanks for joining us. First of all,
it's great to be here. And Jeff, I can do a short version actually. And why don't we say this so we can stay on schedule? And look, the discussion you were just having was awesome. And for everyone on the screen, thank you for the work you're doing. I was there at the beginning and I followed the committee as I moved from Commerce to the White House. I want to thank Rich Ball and Grant Harris and the leadership at ITA for all the work they've done. Let me give a quick highlight between now and let's say 1:30. Does that sound good, given the stop? I think I was supposed to do 1 to 1:20. Let me do 10 minutes. And then what we can try to do is I can meet with the subcommittees in any individual capacity, whatever works for you, Jeff and Ursula, and we'll answer any questions there. Does that sound like a good plan, just to keep you all on schedule?
Sounds great, and then we'll get back to Revati.
Hey,
awesome.
Ronnie, this is Rich. You can go as as long as you need. You don't need to do a short version of that's okay if you have the time.
I'm sorry. The way I scheduled it, Rich, I have a 1 because I thought I was going to be done at 1:20, so I left a little 10-minute. Yeah, good. I'm on it. And Revati, I'm sorry also to get involved in your time, so I hope you do get that time back. Let me just say this. First of all, this group here that is on this committee is a fantastic sort of assembly of knowledge around supply chains. I know the biggest priority for you is you did this for public service. You did this to make sure that recommendations you made actually matter. And so what I want to spend my few minutes here is just telling you about 3 of your recommendations and how they've mattered to the work we're doing. And I hope that this is going to be the beginning of an ongoing conversation about how to make sure that these three recommendations continue to impact policy. So I'll spend it. There's 3 recommendations I want to highlight here, all related to the bioeconomy and your medical products, pharmaceutical supply chain recommendations. First one was D1. This is about using advanced market commitments to foster the development of new platform technologies and get more domestic manufacturing of critical medicines. Key recommendations, something we've been thinking a lot about. I want to update you on our work there. The second one was E1, where you suggested we create a universal regulatory approval process to maintain U.S. competitiveness and ensure global access to new medical products. I'll deal with that issue too. And E2 is the bioeconomy one, ensuring that we have a leadership position in synthetic and industrial biology so we can deliver more effective and accessible therapeutics that are also environmentally sustainable. These are great recommendations. And I think the challenge is always, how are you going to implement and how can we do that in the government? On this side, I think I'm glad to provide updates on all 3. So first on the medical products pieces. Over the last 2 years, we've taken a bunch of different actions to facilitate a more resilient and sustainable supply chain. There's 3 executive orders that I think most people on the screen know of, but it's EO 14001, 14005, and 14017. Collectively, they all bolster supply chain resilience and domestic manufacturing capacity in pharmaceuticals and medical products. So this has been a big focus for the executive branch and the president directly. That said, I will say that we're entering a new period where the recommendations you made are going to be even more important, because for the first 2 years, our focus, first and foremost in this space, was on COVID response, and which is where it needed to be. I think you'd all agree. And we delivered the life-saving vaccines, the COVID therapeutics, the test kits. But now we got to take those lessons from COVID and from the emergency and the official end of the public health emergency coming in May to pivot to a new paradigm for how we think about supply chains, trying to be proactive rather than reactive, trying to make the investments we need in these supply chains to move forward. And I think a few of the lessons that we've already learned, if you look at what ASPR under HHS has done with their supply chain control tower, admittedly with limited data, but they have voluntary data submitted from 8 distributors of medical products and 500 hospitals, and they're creating reports and dashboards around that in the government. As someone who started in government at a time when supply chains weren't necessarily a household word, this is amazing progress by agencies that are aggregating data. We need to do more of that. We need your help in doing that. HHS also has established the new, as you know, DPA Title III program this past summer that's going to provide loans, grants, and other financing to build the healthcare industrial base. And so when you think about sort of making progress in your recommendations here, I think both the consolidation of data, where you have voluntary industry cooperation to provide data on products, and also the Title III DPA authority for loans and grants is going to help deal with the medical product supply chain issues that we've been talking about. Let me say a couple more things on this. We're also doing a lot in the White House to make sure that these issues stay on the front burner. And Monica Gorman, my colleague here, is leading this process as part of our team. We just launched an interagency process that's going to refocus the administration's efforts on the public health industrial base beyond COVID. And I think that it's a really important sort of distinction in a lot of our supply chain work to think about the near-term issues we're going to have to deal with every single day, every single week, and the longer-term strategic thinking. And so the process that Monica is undertaking is around the long-term strategic process around medical products specifically. So it's chaired by the National Economic Council, where I'm currently the acting deputy director, the Domestic Policy Council as well, but also includes all the places in the EOP that you need coordination. And I know a big critique is often that we don't coordinate across different parts of government or within the EOP. Here we have the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the COVID Response Team, the Office of Management and Budget, and the National Security Council, all at the table, all at the beginning, dealing with this medical products issue. So I think in the near term, while we're looking at a lot of the most acute supply chain risks, we are thinking in this organization about how to think about long-term sustainability. So there's 4 areas of focus that I want to put on this committee's radar. One is, how do we improve manufacturing quality, and how do we get more accountability around quality for manufacturers and purchasers? Key issue of information transparency in the medical products industry. How do we improve supply chain visibility? How do we illuminate supply chains so we know where things are coming from and where they're going? How do we actually modernize, optimize, and increase domestic stockpiling that's there for emergencies? And how do we more broadly strengthen the U.S. industrial base? Because a lot of the things we're talking about are sort of general across manufacturing issues we need to play. I mean, so you think about Willie Shee and other people on this call and their work, it reminds us that the entire industrial base can support health products. I also want to let you know that your recommendations on the advanced market commitment as a way to foster new technology are among the ideas we're considering as well. So thank you for that very specific idea, and it's being considered as part of this process. We also agree with your recommendation that, look, market and regulatory certainty are crucial to getting new technologies commercialized. I know Revathi is probably going to move to that next with the discussion around FDA. We're also monitoring, just like you are, these new and innovative platforms you called out, next-gen manufacturing, as a way to sustain this thriving industry. The last piece I'll say on this, and I'll say a word about bioeconomy. We've shared your recommendations with the Office of Science and Technology Policy as well about how to accelerate innovation in this space more broadly. So we're both trying to deal with the front-end innovation as well as the manufacturing of medical products. Beyond that, we are pretty much at day 1, maybe day 2. Monica started this very recently. And so there isn't much more I can say about the details. That said, I'd love to be able to follow up with additional conversations and discussions. And Monica, I think would both be willing to do that at the subcommittee level or in whatever forum that the chairs and others might call out. Before I turn to bioeconomy, let me just get Willie. Willie, put out your question. I'll try to include it in my bioeconomy or wrap up if you can, because I want to get you out there.
Okay, Ronnie, thank you very much for coming today. And what I want to do is I want to sharpen that point on recommendations D1 to D4, which was to call out specifically process innovations and changes there, which afford the U.S. the opportunity to unseat the incumbents. And that's why we were saying, use the demand signal to foster the growth in those areas, right? So I want to make sure that point is not lost, because that is a short strategic opportunity. One of the leaders in that area almost sold out to a Chinese company. Yep. Okay, yep. But CFIUS stopped them, right?
Yep. So, no, this is great, Willie. And look, if you look at the research you've done on process innovation manufacturing, I mean, Jeff's theory of the case, a lot of work he's doing now, it's all about this idea that when we do manufacturing, right, the innovation sort of that we get, the innovations that we discover through manufacturing are really important throughout the value chain. And that's why manufacturing is really important as part of what President Biden's doing across the board, chips, clean energy, to make sure we do more of it here. So I'm on board and it will be considered, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, but specifically, especially those new innovative technologies like continuous flow.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm sorry, Monica, quick add on that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Willie, so this is very much the focus of OSTP right now. They're sort of running a sub work stream on this, and that is exactly the focus, because we know the near-term opportunity is really there. So happy to have further conversation on it, but very much front and center on our radar.
Awesome. And I'll do a minute on the bioeconomy, and I know Monica has to run to the same meeting that I do, probably at 1:30. So on bioeconomy, your recommendation was U.S. leadership to make sure we protect it in synthetic and industrial biology. And we can't agree more. This is very much on our radar, something we're thinking about. I'm glad you suggested it. So in September, the president signed the EO 14081 on advancing biotech and biomanufacturing innovation for a sustainable, safe, and secure American bioeconomy. That EO, that executive order, launched the interagency process actually last fall that is doing multiple listening sessions with stakeholders on bioeconomy and all these issues. Also issues that weren't necessarily mentioned, but workforce needs, supply chain resilience, all those things are happening. Those sessions, we took the feedback from those sessions along with a bunch of other lines of effort. And now we're releasing sector-specific reports where synthetic biology and industrial biology will be particularly useful. We're going to release these reports in March, and that'll be the 180-day mark that's required by the executive order. So the other big piece of news, in addition, I think, to the medical products IPC that Monica's launched, is also the release of these reports in March. And so our expectation is these reports are going to be providing a lot more specifics on how we're going to enforce and reinforce the U.S. leadership position in synthetic and industrial biology across a spectrum of industries, because this is a general purpose technology in so many ways. If you think about from therapeutics to biomaterials and to just generic industrial production. So my recommendation there, given that this is coming out in March, is we do some follow-up conversations with whoever's interested at this committee and the relevant agency representatives, because it'll cross different agencies as soon as the reports are published. So with that, I just want to say thank you again. I'm sorry to slow you down on the schedule, but I think that this group, I'm so glad to see it come to fruition. I'm so glad to see the quarterly meeting. And I just want you to know these recommendations, these are only 3 of them, but they're making an impact on our work. And I'm happy to detail and run through other recommendations that might be in my wheelhouse, whether they release to chips, supply chain resilience, or manufacturing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeff and Ursula and the entire group here. And just thank you again for all your hard work on the committee.
Ronnie and Monica, thanks for joining us. Revathi, let maybe get back to you were we got a little bit of an update from Ronnie about some of the bio and pharma related recommendations. Did you want to follow up on any of those?
Yeah, I think I don't know if any of Rainier or anyone is on the call yet. I'll just say that the same work that Ronnie is talking about was one of the key areas that we had identified, which is how do you really figure out a way to create supply chain visibility, particularly as focused on kind of the FDA regulated space or pharmaceutical medical industry, which we think the healthcare infrastructure in general is fragile, right? And we can see how it came together during COVID, which was amazing, shows the innovation that exists in this country, but also that creating that end-to-end is not an easy thing to do. So, you know, the focus of that work was, can we bring together the right agencies and the right companies to really focus on how do you create supply chain competitiveness focused on the healthcare sector of the economy. We feel like there is a tremendous amount of data and information that is available, but it probably is disparate and fragmented in terms of where it exists. So if we can find a way to really create a good workshop and a conversation around identifying the top areas of priority, there are organizations that are already doing this, but they're probably doing it in some kind of an ad hoc way. If you put the power of the US government behind it, we think it can be done in a more structured way. And prioritize the areas of supply chain that will really focus on resiliency in the healthcare sector. If you look at kind of the future of our dependency on areas of healthcare, that is super important to us. So there is an upcoming workshop that is coming in that is being organized by the subcommittee that will focus on this work. So I think we'll talk more about it in our next meeting, I would say, Jeff, but it is very much in line with what Ronnie just talked about.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions for Revathi related to these topics or others for the manufacturing subcommittee?
I'd say the only other one, Jeff, I would add is if Willie is on the call and he can talk a little bit about the work we did, the work we did and the recommendation on how do you focus on kind of expanding the funding for the National Defense Stockpile and how that helps the focus on future technologies. So Willie, if you don't mind talking about it, that would be great.
Yeah. We have been looking at this recommendation D4, which was using the NDS transaction fund, again, to fund new process technologies for critical minerals. Now, we were sort of expecting some information from DOE, but I guess that got removed from the agenda this morning. But my understanding, our proposal was, again, look at some of these new technologies for extracting critical minerals, including lithium, but things like cobalt and stuff like that. Now, by chance, we had a discussion. This is new news to most people. We had a discussion with one of the members of the House Select Committee on China this morning, who this is a hot button issue for them as well, critical mineral sourcing. Okay, I have to say some of our recent digging on this says there's a lot of pulls on the national defense stockpile right now because of depletion of armaments going towards Ukraine. What the people told us this morning was, one of the reasons we've been using DOD for procurement, because they're good at this and they're efficient, but they are focused on their own programmatic needs, right? And so is not exactly aligned. So we have to do a little bit of rethinking on using the NDS stockpile purchases as a pull for this, but we're going to connect with this representative who's on the House Select Committee and do some more work on that as well. But there's clear recognition of the need. We're still waiting for the DOE response on, some of our ideas vis-a-vis investment in new technologies and new process technologies, especially for refining these minerals and extracting them. Okay, so it's still very much a work in progress.
Thanks, Willie. So Jeff, I would just end by saying, if you think about the general themes of the work of the manufacturing subcommittee, everything from how do we provide skilled labor for us to continue the work around developing manufacturing and supply chain in this country. How do you focus on creating resiliency in key areas of expertise that we think we need to build expertise around, end-to-end supply chain resiliency? So whether it's in the healthcare sector or advanced technologies that we think the National Defense Stockpile could help in promoting that by creating a pull for that type of technology. So really focused on those areas, I would say, in terms of the wide range of recommendations made. But a few of these we can report on the next time.
Thanks, Revathi. Thank you for your leadership and for the work of the subcommittee. Willie, let's connect offline and see if we can get the answers that you need from the DOE.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Gene Soroka, who is going to, Gene, anything from the freight movement and infrastructure subcommittee, please share, but especially a focus, which you've already started today, on, how is the spending under IRA and IIJA going, what's left, and is it distributed in a way that makes sense? Thanks, Gene.
Right. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. The Freight Subcommittee continues to develop and build on the recommendations that we all submitted back in last June. And we'll finalize these recommendations in time for the summer meeting of this committee. But there's strong consensus around the three focal areas, just to bring everybody back up to speed. Number one, the development and resiliency of the freight industry workforce. Second, increasing American exports. And third, targeting that federal investment. On the workforce, we've still got a lot to digest that's come to us from organized labor, and some of the Kyle Mulhall is on the call today. So we want to make sure we get that right, and that's why we'll deliver it in the summer meeting. A lot around workforce protection, making sure that no matter how fast technology is moving, we don't leave the workforce behind. On increasing American exports, again, something that has gotten broad appeal from the folks that we're working with, not only in this committee, but outside subject matter experts. And please remember that our nation's trade deficit is at nearly $1 trillion by the closure of last year, 2022. And that is the highest trade gap in our country's history. it is pure and simple a drag on U.S. economic output, mathematically and in reality. Driving those exports, even with heightened imports or reliance on overseas goods and products, is a necessity. Trying to find ways and wring out the sweet spots in existing relationships, the help across cabinet level experts such as Secretary Vilsack in agriculture, along with others, are going to be key. On the side of targeting federal investment, we understand that it's critical to our supply chain. Never before in a generation have we seen the alignment at the federal, state, and local levels across the country. But the coordination of these federal investments is especially important given the scale, speed, and scope by which the administration has made the funding available. And speaking here only in the Port of Los Angeles, putting back on that local hat, we've received a $20 million grant for grade separation through the RAISE program. Many of the colleagues here working with us and those that we tap into for advice have been awarded grants on the Port Infrastructure Development Program, also known as PIDP. And the notice of funding opportunity for an additional $662 million in PIDP funding was released just last week. So everybody's gearing up, sharpen their pencils, going after that bucket of money as well. Overall, in the bipartisan infrastructure laws, you may remember $17 billion were committed to ports and waterways. Again, this is a great start. We'd like to see annual appropriations, annual budgeting, because that $17 billion number is what other countries individually are investing in their ports, either one time or annually. And in addition to that, the freight eligible funding is up to $75 billion. And areas such as RAISE, infra, and others like the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. There's money out there in broader buckets that we can approach as well. Funding's being made through the Department of Energy, specifically on the hydrogen hub funding, $2 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act funding for port electrification, and the numbers are starting to stack up when you add all of this together. The opportunity is great, but the risk is that the impact can be diffused without a coordinated investment plan. I showed that map earlier, and I'll pop it up one more time just so folks understand the order of magnitude. Again, data compiled by the American Association of Port Authorities to show where the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money is going, early days at the completion of 2022. And to me, this needs attention at the highest level. Again, as I stated and will repeat, we don't want to take money from any other port, regardless of coast, but we've got to get this money out faster. It's got to move quicker, especially where it's going to have the greatest return for the American taxpayer. We've got to be smart about this because we're going to wind up looking at underinvestment as we did during COVID-19 and the supply chain crunch, which was so clearly evident. So we don't need to overcorrect. We've got to get this funding going out, calling more attention. Unfortunately, Mayor Landrieu didn't have much time. Jeff, we're going to have to find a way to connect with him. Because again, it's not just a matter of beating a drum here. As we said to General Lyons, give us some insights. Where do we have to sharpen our approach? How do we need to do things better? And how do we have to get the attention of the evaluators to make sure this flow is done appropriately? So I'll stop there. But these three key areas we'll have even more clarity on as we work in the days and weeks ahead around the workforce and career experience that we need in the supply chain, not immune, much like every other segment of industry, with lowest levels of unemployment, high levels of open jobs throughout the industry sectors and nationwide. Working on those exports and then making sure that we maximize this once in a generation investment at the federal level. Jeff,
Gene,
back to you.
Before we go to questions while that slide's still up, has anybody taken the $9 billion and just said for each of the programs that have been so far funded, what's the increase in throughput, in containers or whatever the the correct numerator would be, or denominator actually. But I'm interested in kind of the dollars spent per container, and if there are huge anomalies in across this map.
Good way to look at it. I don't think we've had the evaluators discuss that particular approach, but happy to carry that. And I see Barbara's hand up.
Thanks, Barbara.
Just a quick thought, Gene, insofar as looking at this map and realizing, what we go through for grant approvals, do you think it's lack of shovel-ready projects on the West Coast that could be having an impact on the award of funding?
I think that's an approach that has to be looked at with every location and the work that we're trying to, for example, here in LA, we've got $1 billion worth of projects ready to go in our pipeline. And this federal money combined with Governor Newsom's state money can only accelerate those projects. So I can't speak for all the other ports, Barbara, but that's got to be a key and critical piece of the evaluation.
That's great. Thank you, Gene.
Thanks.
Other questions for Gene?
Okay, great. So Jeff, more to come. Big work in the days and weeks ahead with our friends in labor. And then I think we can craft an opportunity here because that labor piece is woven throughout all three of these big segments that we've been putting forward. So look forward to more consultation with Ursula and you.
No doubt. Gene, thanks for your leadership. Thanks to the members of the freight subcommittee. All right, let's, I don't think I want to make sure I didn't miss something else on the agenda. Heather, is there anything else that?
No, nothing else, just the closing stuff.
Are there any questions or other business from committee members that we should discuss at this time? Okay, not seeing, oh, Rick?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. The only thing I bring to mind as someone who's been on this committee for over a decade now is the coordination with other agencies. I think all of our recommendations that we typically make have some level of coordination with either transportation or Department of Labor or other agencies. And I just think we can't lose sight of that. That's going to be so important as we move forward, making a recommendation that's actionable and actually does what it's intended to do. It's just a thought that crept into my head here.
I think that's a great point, Rick. It's an important nuance here in terms of moving to action. I would say that the Department of Commerce partners that we have been instrumental in ensuring that on our agendas here for the full committee that we have representation from other cabinet level representatives. And I think we need to do even more. We've highlighted some places where we have gaps today. Gene just mentioned one. We need to do a better job with DOE. So that's a great call to action for the next couple of committee meetings for sure. Because I think we have the full attention and partnership of the Department of Commerce. We need to ensure we have that across lines. Other comments or questions? All right, well, if there aren't any, I want to thank Assistant Secretary Harris, Deputy Assistant Secretary Giuliani, Secretary Raimondo, Senior Advisor Landreau, Commissioner Bensel, Ronnie Chatterjee, and General Lyons for your insightful remarks and feedback on our recommendations. Thanks to the members of the ACSCC, including our government partners. We've now come to the end of our scheduled agenda. Our subcommittee's work over the next few months will focus on continuing to refine the recommendations that we've discussed today and on ensuring new ones have the support of all of the constituencies represented on our committee. Our next full committee meeting will take place in mid-June. I remain confident that together we can make meaningful progress in a whole host of areas. One order of business we haven't covered yet is participation in the subcommittee meetings, and this is worth just a brief aside. Membership requires that the member attend subcommittee meetings, the named member. Where that isn't possible, it's not permissible to send a substitute. This is to subcommittee meetings and certainly to this committee meeting. As a reminder, for subcommittee meetings, you may have staff members present to help with work that will continue outside of the formal meetings. But please clear this with Rich, before you bring in partners to the subcommittee meetings. All right, we're now adjourned. Thanks everyone for your hard work and your support of this important effort. Take care.
Thanks.